really great question. And, there's not one particular answer, but I've kind of come to some realizations over the last few months. The pandemic has been really good to reflect on magic. And one of the things I've realized is actually I create based on the input that I receive. I'm not one of those creators who can just come up with a 1,000 ideas and 20 of them are ones that every magician in the world wants to perform. That's just not me. I need to have input. I've realized I need to be around other magicians. I need to be talking to other magicians about magic. I need to be watching magicians perform tricks. And I need to see stuff outside of magic. I need to see theater. I need to see TV. All these things come together and they all somehow smash into my brain and eventually are released in exactly the right way. I'm a computer programmer. That's what I used to do before I was a magician full-time. And we have this saying, garbage in, garbage out, which means for computer programming world, if you write a really bad program, that program is going to do really rubbish things. You're not going to get good output from bad input. And the same applies to magic. So I've realized, and only recently actually, that to create the best magic, I need to give myself the best input. So I really try and immerse myself in magic. I'm constantly reviewing and analyzing the tricks I see and the performances I see and the conversations I have with other magicians. And then once all of that muddles around in my brain for a while, I can start to think about what are the best openers that I saw and how would the best opener look like for me? So to me, it's all about input, and without input, I would have absolutely no output. Great question. And I'll try and avoid the obvious answers because the obvious ones we all know, which is perform a lot, practice a lot, that kind of thing. But let's try and go deeper than that. Let's try and look at other pieces of advice. And the one piece of advice I would give really does bounce off what I just said about needing great input, which is make sure that you are getting the best input. So it's really hard to do, but make sure that the magicians that you're listening to, the magicians you're watching, are the best magicians. Right now, there is a new video uploaded to YouTube or Instagram every few seconds that wants to show us a new magic trick, or someone's performing a trick, someone's teaching, someone's selling a trick. So my advice is really try and find the signal from the noise. And by that, I mean, try and seek out the very best magic. And that's the magic you should learn from. And that's the magicians you should listen to. And it's really hard to do, right? Because how do you know who's the best magician? How do you know what the best trick is? And I found a solution to this, and it's to pick a magician and study that magician. Spend as long as you can researching. Doesn't matter whether that magician is Hofzinser from hundreds of years ago or Michael Amar from the last 40 years. Just find a magician and study them as much as you can. Really dig deep. A magician that I did this with is Edward G. Brown. And Edward G. Brown was a card magician from the 1930s and 40s, pretty much an unknown card magician to magicians nowadays. But I decided to dig really deep into his work. So I spent a year researching everything I could about this magician, all of the tricks, all of the performances, bits about his life. And then that way, once I'm done studying him, I can move on to another magician. And now I've got something to compare against. I'm not just looking at all of this magic that's out there and all of this input that's fighting for my attention. Instead, I'm saying, I'm going to take this and I'm going to look at it and I'm going to compare it to now the next magician that I'm studying, and then the next magician and the next magician. And that gives you a better way of filtering the signal from the noise. So that's a long-winded one piece of advice. We can do two more. But the main one is careful who you study from, make sure that you're studying from the best. And if you can, really try and spend time studying just one magician at a time. Next piece of advice is just remember that often you're not the most important person in a show. Magicians often, when you read about magic, are talking about their audience as if, how do I make sure everybody looks at me? How do I make sure everyone's watching? And how do I stop hecklers? And the truth is, the people in your audience are just as interesting as you, just as important as you. And I think a better show will be created if you remember that. If you remember that the audience are there and the audience can be part of the experience. So that's my second piece of advice. And let's think of a good third one. The third one is a little cliche, I guess, but it's to love magic, to love what you do, because if magic becomes a chore, and I've seen lots of young magicians who have kind of got to that point where they're like, I don't like practicing. Like, if magic's a chore, then maybe it's not for you. If you want to dedicate your life to magic, just invest everything you can, but make sure you enjoy it. Make sure you do what you love. And if you find that you don't like practicing card magic, then maybe work on some stage illusions or coin tricks or whatever. So just find a part of magic that you love, and then you'll really want to throw yourself into it. Can I give one more bonus piece of advice? I'm going to go for 4. I'm going to cheat. This one is, it all stems from something I read in a Darren Brown book, and it's the best magicians have 1 foot in magic and 1 foot in something else. And I think that's so true. When I left school, I decided I wanted to be a computer programmer. I love magic. I'd loved magic back then, but I decided that maybe actually I should spend my time focusing on computer programming for a little while, because the best magicians have 1 foot in magic and 1 foot in something else. So by learning those other skills, I managed to get lots of kind of background, lots of things I learned from the world that I wouldn't have learned if my only focus was on magic. So I guess what I'm saying is don't be afraid to learn other things, and don't be afraid to have other passions other than magic, because actually they'll always make you a better magician in the long run. Oh, that's a tough question, because it really changes quite regularly for me. So the advice and the books I will suggest now will change. If you see me next week, they'll probably change. But the kind of timeless ones are, of course, Card College, all 5 volumes by Roberto Giobbi. Those books are really interesting because I talk to a lot of magicians about the books, and you can really tell that the best magicians are the ones that still learn from books like Card College. The best magicians are not afraid to reread books like Card College and start at volume 1 and say, what did I miss when I was learning magic? Or look at the essays in volumes 3 and 4, which are some of Roberto's best work. And I think you can always learn by going back to Card College. The same applies, I guess, to Tarbell Course of Magic. I think it's 8 volumes, 7 or 8 volumes. I, every now and again, just take one of those books off the shelf, open it up, see where I land, and I read. Because you'll always become a better magician by learning stuff from Tarbell, because it's such a wide array of magic. You know, there's card magic for sure. There's standard plots. There's classic plots. But there's also some really weird stuff, tricks with eggs, tricks with chalkboards, and all sorts of strange stuff. I'm never going to perform those tricks, but I certainly love to know the principles and the classics of magic that I wouldn't normally learn if I was just focusing on the kind of magic I perform myself. So Tarbell's a really great choice. And one more, let's think, what would be a good book? Books of Wonder. You know what? Books of Wonder are the perfect choice by Tommy Wonder. Tommy Wonder was one of the greatest magicians who've ever lived. And I quite often joke that the Books of Wonder are books that magicians should read every year. In fact, I think every magician should be forced to take a week away, go on vacation for a week, and just sit and read these books. Because every time I read these books, and I read them often, I'm re-inspired to be a better magician. So Books of Wonder by Tommy Wonder really are a must-read for any magician. My book's called The Boy Who Cried Magic, and I've always wanted to write a book of my own magic. I own, alongside Joshua J, I own Vanishing Inc, and we publish magic books. In fact, over the last 10 years, we've published over 100 magic books. So I spend my days, all day, every day, working on magic books. And it's funny, I always promise myself, pretty much after every book, that my book would be next. I will spend the time after I've laid out this book by J.K. Hartman or Roberto Giobbi, that my one will be next. And it just never was. And that's because we have this constant stream of magic that we are working on at Vanishing Inc. At any one time, we could be working on 40 or 50 projects, which kind of sounds crazy when I say it, but it just means that there's not much time to just say, hey, all of these 40 or 50 creators, I'm going to take a break now. I'm going to take a year. I'm going to write my own book. It just doesn't work. So I promised myself after every one that I would do that, and it could never happen. So I ended up taking some time off. I moved, my family and I, we moved to Las Vegas for a few months, and I just spent all of my downtime just hammering out this book, just working on every paragraph, just reworking it, looking at how the best way to explain things and deciding on what tricks I wanted to teach. So yeah, it's the book I always wanted to write. It's a book I'm so proud of, and it's been so well received by magicians. We launched it in October, and it sold out in just a couple of weeks, full print run. It's the biggest print run we've ever done, and it's also the fastest selling book we've ever had at Vanishing Inc. So I couldn't be more proud of the results of it. So Josh J and I have been best friends for years. We first met on a TV show called The Young Magicians Showcase, which was a TV show that Lance Burton did in Las Vegas, where he brought young magicians to his theater. This is in 1999, so a long time ago, to perform on a TV special. And I was one of those young magicians, so was Josh. And there were quite a few other magicians there. I think there was 12, 13, maybe, I don't remember the exact number. But all these great young magicians, but there was one guy that I met that was wearing a bright red suit. And the reason he appealed to me was because I was also wearing a bright red suit. So we hit it off pretty much there and then. But back in 1999, it wasn't so easy to communicate. We didn't have Zoom and Skype and those kind of things. So we didn't really talk all that often, but then we would bump into each other at conventions where one of us or both of us were lecturing, that kind of thing. And then as the world got more technologically advanced, we would speak more often. And Josh was doing a lecture tour in the UK. Back then I used to work in London, but live in Gloucester, which is about 3 or 4 hours away by car. So it was the perfect thing that on the weekdays, Josh would stay with me in London, and on the weekends, he would be lecturing somewhere down south in the UK, and then he would come back to stay with me at my house in the south. So it was just a convenience for him, but that meant we got to spend a lot of time together, and we would spend hours every night talking about our dreams in magic. And back then I had a day job. I was a programmer, like I mentioned, and I was getting to the point where I was working just way too much. I was working this, every time I say it, it sounds unbelievable, but there was a time I worked, I think it was about 34 or 35 hours at my desk without leaving my desk at my office. And I just realized it was too much. I realized I was ruining my opportunity to become the magician I always wanted to be by focusing on my career too much. So I said, I'd always wanted to start this kind of online magic shop, online magic brand that would have the feeling of an old time magic shop. I think there was a need for that. And just so happened that Josh had the same feeling. Josh was releasing all of his tricks through other magic shops, but he didn't get to control the quality of those. Once you sold a trick back then, it was in the hands of the publisher, and you just had to hope they would do a good job with it. So just turned out that we had the same vision, but it turned out that we had complementary skill sets. His skill sets were different to mine were different to his, and it just turned out that together we were almost like the missing piece of each other's puzzle, which I realize sounds overly romantic, but that's exactly what it was, that the things I could do, Josh couldn't do, the things that Josh could do, I couldn't do. So it just made a perfect partnership, and it was only supposed to be a small kind of magic shop, but now we have a team in, I think, 5 or 6 different countries. We have, there's always somebody working at Vanishing Inc due to how time zones work out. So now we've become the world's largest magic shop, and I couldn't be prouder of what Josh and I and the whole team have achieved with Vanishing Inc.